And see, that's the reason why a lot of times you have all this ridiculous set criteria in the workplaces, because I could say maybe in the 80s and the 90s, there were like multiple jobs to choose from. Even though they may have been low paying, you could get a job like that. But when jobs have gone out of business, or the laborer has been sent overseas for, or the work has been sent overseas for cheap labor, in sweatshops and I think and stuff like that, then you're only left with a few businesses. And so they feel like they can, how could I put it? They can abuse I don't know the word I know the word I'm looking for, but I don't know. They can abuse the fact that there's a limited amount of occupations to choose from. So they can set all this criteria and, and just figure, and they just feel like, oh, well, people will just have to obey it. It's like slavery. It's like, oh, well, where else are you all going to go? Because there's not too many options to choose from. You always need multiple options. I can remember a time when people were going to, for job seeking, and one of the first things that would come out of their mouths is, when can you start? When can you start? And then they were willing to accommodate what days you needed off, or if you couldn't come in, or if there was something you couldn't do for whatever reason, they were willing to accommodate because they were desperate for labor, because there were many other jobs that people could go out and get and leave them hanging. But now I noticed that the more businesses that went out of business or moved their businesses overseas, then it was like the jobs that were considered the downgrades started getting the big head and started thinking that they were the top dog and the top jobs when they were not. And they were never considered the top jobs. They were the jobs that nobody wanted. And I'm just going to tell it like it is. And I remember a time when people were going after the jobs where you could dress up and wear high heel shoes and sit behind a desk. And I remember that. And then you had these staffing agencies, and I think a lot of people were going for clerical work. They didn't want to do manufacturing. They didn't want to do retail. They didn't want to do food. They wanted to go to jobs where they could dress up. They wanted something professional. And then when they got rid of those types of jobs where you could do like clerical work, office work, and all of that, and the only thing that was left was like the jobs that you didn't have to dress up to go to. I do recall seeing people that were still dressing up like they were doing clerical work to go work in jobs that I could tell I don't think they really wanted. But, businesses had started closing or whatever, for whatever reason. And, there just weren't many choices left. And like I said, there were just certain companies that I'm not going to name any, that people were going after. And I don't know what happened. I guess they went out of business or moved overseas. It was one or the other, and then the jobs that were the less favorable started coming up with all this ridiculous criteria, because they felt like, well, you either follow the criteria or you don't have a job. Whereas before, when there were many jobs to choose from, they didn't have all this crazy, ridiculous criteria set up. Oh, all these point systems. And once you get a certain amount of points, you're out the door and this and that. They didn't have all that. There was no such thing as that. There was absolutely no such thing as that. And now we live in a world where if a person gets sick, they can't even call out at work for fear of losing their job. Because if they lose their job, how are they going to pay their mortgages, their house note, the car note, or whatever? How are they going to do that? So it's like they got to go to work sick. If their children are sick, they got to send them to school sick or daycare sick or leave them at home by themselves. It's like these people, a lot of these companies feel like they have you by the throat. And that's the reason why I would encourage you all, if there's any way possible, and that all things are possible with God, that you can gain and maintain financial independence, I would, by opening your own businesses or your own companies, even though you may start off small, I would greatly encourage you to do so, because nobody should live their lives in misery.